everyone. I am going to be doing a book review today on The Snow Killings by Marney Rich Keenan, and if I say that wrong, I am really sorry. This takes place in Michigan, Oakland County. I actually spent 8 years living in Michigan, so some of these places I have actually either visited, like the cities I've actually visited, or I've lived by certain cities or towns that they mentioned. In 1976 and 1977, there were 4 child deaths that happened in this area. Not only were these kids killed, they were kidnapped, they were held hostage for sometimes multiple days or up to 2 weeks. One I think was held for 19 days specifically. They were sexually assaulted and then eventually murdered when their abductors finished what they wanted to do with them. And then they were driven out into the snow, dumped on the side of the road or right up next to buildings, and then just left. Their bodies were just left to be easily found and discovered by somebody walking or driving by. Now, initially when this happened, there was a big investigation. It says it was the biggest one in the US history. I don't know how accurate that is. That's just one of the things it says. But supposedly it was a huge investigation going on throughout Michigan to try and find this child killer. So they only had a couple clues or anonymous tips, or when they went and interrogated people or questioned people, they would tell the cops about what one guy looked like, what kind of vehicle they were driving. But in general, after having the task force open for 2 years, it was decided to be shut down, that they had not had any real leads, that they didn't have any suspects. So the man in charge at the time said, we're going to close down the investigation and it's just going to be considered a cold case. Now, this case was cold. Well, it's technically still a cold case, but it was cold for 30 years before somebody decided to reopen the case, or the state of Michigan decided to open the case again to have it investigated. One of the people, one of the lead detectives, or one of the detectives on the case was actually a child and a friend to one of the boys who was abducted and murdered. So it almost comes like this full circle. Now you gotta remember, like, some parts of Michigan, there's some pretty small towns, so everybody knows everybody. Now the investigator now, who is a cop, his dad was previously a cop and worked on the case during its prime time. A lot of the stuff that he knows or kind of can remember from his childhood is stuff that his dad told him, or stuff that he remembers going on. So he is doubly devoted to cracking this case that his father could not crack. This book is just crammed full of information. It talks about the Oakland County killings, those kids also being related to the Fox Island kids, because there are people who were involved in both situations because of the sex rings that were going on more prolifically. It was going on a lot more, I guess, in the 70s. There wasn't any child laws that were protecting kids at the time. So a lot of men in power, or who had a lot of money, were taking these kids, making sex tapes or videos with them, and then, like, you know, buy kids, buy children. So some of these people who are involved in the Fox Island case, I guess is the best way for me to phrase it, was also involved in the Oakland County case. And those guys who, I guess I could say, presumably murdered those 4 kids, they had also assaulted other people within the county. And now 30 years later, as adults, our main lead detective is able to go find these guys, because it's mostly men. There is some women too that came forward and talked about it, but he's able to find these people and get their side of the story and what happened to them in their youth, who was involved in it, and who was like the leader that was doing all these bad things. It's really in depth. Originally, you kind of go in thinking it's only these 4 kids and it's only in Oakland County. But the further you get into the story and the research and all of it, the more that you find out that it's not just in Oakland County, that it's much bigger, that it spreads farther across Michigan. It's really disgusting to me that you find out that so many people that were in executive positions or who had a lot of money and influence were able to most likely get police at the time to kind of brush stuff under the rug because they had money. So it's pretty sick. I hate to think that that would be something that still goes on now. I'm sure it does, but hearing it and hearing the story and how it's so frustrating, because in hindsight, you like as you're reading it, in hindsight, you can tell that they probably most likely had caught or found who was responsible for the killings of these 4 kids, but the police never released the information, never looked further into it, because the family was so prominent and wealthy that they were literally telling the police to brush it under the rug. This family was threatening other kids, and it does seem like there was some crooked cops who were killing people to help cover up who was actually responsible for the murders. Now, again, not 100% proof, the case is not cracked, but there are some things in this story that are definitely fishy. Like 3 people commit suicides the exact same way after they are told about a cop who might be involved in the murders or the cover-up. Also, another police officer shot himself twice in the chest with 2 different guns. I don't think so. I mean, personally, like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. You have two guns. You're holding 2 guns to shoot yourself. I think most people, specifically, like, I'm not trying to be sexist. Statistically speaking, though, like, when men want to kill themselves, they put one in the brain. They don't shoot themselves in the chest. So there's a lot of very suspicious things that happened evolving around this case, where it, to me, it makes it seem very suspicious. So I would highly recommend, if you are into true crime, if you want a much deeper, detailed review of stuff that happened in the Oakland County killings, this would be a great book. The author did a phenomenal job at talking to the lead investigator, to the families, about the case, the situation, how they feel, what they felt like back then. You get a lot of different perspectives from people who have been involved in this case for literally decades. Now, again, the only thing I didn't like about this book is that nothing. It's not that I didn't like anything. It's just really disheartening when you get to the end and it's just like, there is still no suspect found. The murderer is still not proven. It's still technically a cold case, which sucks, because you want to know who the murderer is. You want to know, you want some kind of closure, and really there isn't any closure, and there might not be any closure for these families, which is kind of sad. But with the advancements in technology and DNA evidence, maybe one day within the near future, they'll be able to solve this case, or maybe someone will confess and help close the case. Who knows? We don't know yet. In general though, I definitely like this book. I would highly recommend it. I listened to it on Audible. It is under the free section under true crime. It's 13 hours long, something like that, but it was a really good listen. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye everyone.